He's coming off a huge game, a huge win against the 49ers. And things are rolling for Fitzpatrick, and he goes on these runs kind of every year. So this is a dangerous one. So this is the one where I'm going to say start him, but be careful, because there's an opportunity for Fitzpatrick to have one of those, stinker games that he has, when you expect him to have a good game. We thought that the 49ers would come out and it would be a statement game last week, and it'd be tough for the Dolphins to really play very well. And they came out and they stomped the 49ers. And now we have a bunch of question marks about the 49ers. Get to that in a couple of the questions. So what do you do with Ryan Fitzpatrick? I think this is the week to start him against the Jets. And then you're going to have to start figuring out what you want to do with Fitzpatrick if he's one of your quarterbacks moving forward. The other start is one that I've been kind of singing his praises since the preseason, because prior to his injury last year, Matthew Stafford was an MVP caliber quarterback. And this season started off a little rusty as expected, but is giving you 20 plus fantasy points. He's looked good in his last week. He's now coming off a bye. He's going against Jacksonville, which I don't think you need to be too concerned with. So Matthew Stafford. So your two quarterback starts, Ryan Fitzpatrick and Matthew Stafford. Sits for this week. And this might be a sit for the whole season, is Carson Wentz. He doesn't look right to me. And he's going up against a Baltimore defense, which is also not a good matchup for him and the Eagles anyways. So stay away from Carson Wentz this week. And the other one, we talked last week about the Bears defense, and they've been really good. I mean, like top 3 good this year. And Teddy Bridgewater coming in still doesn't have Christian McCaffrey, although Mike Davis has looked good. I'd be hesitant to start Teddy Bridgewater this week against the Bears. Your sleeper pick this week, and he might be your fill-in a number of weeks. And we're going to pause after I tell you who the sleeper is, because I want to talk about their entire offense, because it's our first question that's been sent in. So the sleeper pick this week against the Arizona Cardinals is Andy Dalton. I know what you're thinking. It's Andy Dalton, and you're thinking back to his days in Cincinnati. A couple of things of note when he was in Cincinnati. During the regular season, Andy Dalton played very well. In fact, he played so well that we expected him to do much better in the postseason, which he obviously did not. So we kind of hold that against him. He never got a playoff win, but we can't really say that was all his fault. And in Cincinnati, it's kind of the same thing you're seeing with Joe Burrow. There's very little running game. There is no offensive line, right? Like this year, we're seeing Joe Burrow running for his life. That's the same type of offensive line, obviously different players, but the same type of offensive line that Andy Dalton was standing behind. Now, I'm not saying he's going to come out and do what Dak was doing. Dak was on another level this year. He was going to break so many records had he stayed healthy for yards and probably touchdowns. And that all unfortunately got cut short because of the injury. But he's got a good offensive line, definitely a super strong, right, with Ezekiel Elliott running game. He's got a ton of wide receivers, right, between CeeDee Lamb and Cooper, and I'm forgetting one, Michael Gallup, right? He's got weapons. So for the first time, we're going to see Andy Dalton with an offensive line, with a core, a group of wide receivers, not just AJ Green like he had in Cincinnati. We're really going to see what Andy Dalton can do when he has pieces around him. So he's a sleeper pick, but he's also one that if you're worried about that Dallas offense, look, again, not going to get you what Dak was getting you, but if you need to stream a quarterback, if Dak was your quarterback, I'm okay, depending on matchups, going with Andy Dalton moving forward. So to the first question, the Dallas offense, now what? I think you got to knock down kind of everyone a little bit, with the exception of Ezekiel Elliott. I think I think they start to lean on him a little bit more. I think you'll probably see a little bit more of Tony Pollard, right? Look, Ezekiel Elliott's still going to be the workhorse back, but he's going to need a breather every once in a while. So if you're in a deeper league, or you need kind of that secondary running back, Tony Pollard might be a guy that you have. Amari Cooper comes down a notch. CeeDee Lamb comes down a notch. Michael Gallup comes down a notch. But they're still going to get theirs. You're still going to get some good value out of the Dallas offense. So to our running backs, starts and sits, we're going to start off with my guy, David Montgomery, for the Bears, playing against Carolina. If you're streaming running backs this year, okay, unless something changes in Carolina, pick the running back that's facing the Carolina defense. It's a great matchup on paper, in reality, in fantasy. So this week, David Montgomery, and again, without Tariq Cohen in the mix yet, or I guess he's gone for the season, David Montgomery's going to be the workhorse. So he's a great start this week in Carolina. My second one is kind of moved from, throughout this season, he's gone from a sit to a sleeper, and he's kind of bounced around, but I was high on him at the beginning of the season. I think you see a good game this week, again, because of the matchup with Antonio Gibson. So go ahead and you can start Antonio Gibson against the Giants this week. And then our sits, this might be a sit. Again, I feel like I'm putting him on this list every week, and I hate it because I think he deserves better. But Mark Ingram against Philadelphia, and it's not as much to do with the matchup against Philly. It's more to do with, he's getting around the same amount of touches and same amount of snaps as Gus Edwards and Dobbins. So you got to stay away from him until such time as, the Ravens decide we're going to make him our featured back, or one of these guys our featured back. And they're not doing that yet. So stay away from Mark Ingram this week. And the second one, and this one's funny because I was reading a lot about now that Le'Veon Bell has been released from the Jets. Oh, this is Frank Gore's kind of his resurgence tour. No, it's not his resurgence tour. He had a couple of weeks when Bell was hurt, and he didn't really do anything with it. So I guess if you need, 4, 5, 6 fantasy points, sure. But Frank Gore's not your guy. There's much better options at the running back position, and we'll talk about some of those waiver wire pickups in a minute. But better options than Frank Gore right now. To question number 2. So this comes to us. Let's see. Trade. All right. I love the trade questions. Trade Clyde Edwards-Helaire for wide receiver 1. Okay. I need some more details because, if you can get a wide receiver 1 for Clyde Edwards right now, do it. Especially if you're in a PPR league, and depending on your depth at running back. If you drafted him early and you don't have a lot of depth, then no, don't make that trade. If you're in a standard scoring league, probably don't make that trade. Again, it's very dependent on who the wide receiver is and what kind of format you're playing in. But I think this Kansas City offense, obviously, okay, they not that they looked bad last week, but they're going to score some points. Hillier is going to get his opportunities, so I wouldn't be trying to dump him right now. But if you have an opportunity to pick up a wide receiver 1, then of course, see what you can get from him. Okay, so now our wide receivers. Start this week. He's been for a team that has been so bad in the New York Jets this season. Jamison Crowder has looked fantastic from a fantasy perspective, and he's a start this week against Miami. I think as long as he's healthy, I'm starting Jamison Crowder. Now I have him in a couple of my leagues. I'm fortunate that I have him in at the flex, and he has delivered every week. So I'm a big fan of Jamison Crowder's, although I'm not a fan of the Jets right now. The next one is A.J. Brown. So we saw what A.J. Brown can do when healthy, right? Ryan Tannehill and the Titans offense they're throwing the ball a lot more than I thought they would, to be honest. Having Derrick Henry back there, I would have thought they would have been They would have been run heavy, but they're not. So AJ Brown, when healthy, I think is a start, and this week against Houston is another good start. So now we're gonna go to the sits, wide receiver sits, and we're gonna talk about one that is interesting. So I'm gonna bounce a little bit back and forth because he's on my waiver wire, a guy that you should pick up. So you should look to pick up Travis Fulgham from the Eagles. However, don't play him this week against Baltimore, right? Like if you want to, maybe you can sneak and get him on the waiver wire from some of your other people that you're playing against in your league, because they're looking at the matchup, right? And if you have the opportunity to pick him up, put him on your bench, for the week after or week after that, whatever. Yeah, I think he's a legitimate wide receiver, flex play, kind of week in, week out. Not this week though against Baltimore, but if you can pick Travis Fulgham up, you should. So I'm going to pause there for a second because we got one in on a question here on the chat. Will Joe Burrow deliver more great plays in a consistent basis? Good question, because again, I think Joe Burrow is going to be very matchup dependent. If they're playing against a team like Baltimore, stay away from him. A team that is blitz heavy because of that offensive line, stay away from him. I think he's matchup dependent, but yeah, I think Joe Burrow's, they're going to be down in games. He's going to be throwing the ball around a lot. He obviously has a good connection with Tyler Boyd, and T Higgins. So yeah, I like Joe Burrow. I did a podcast, I want to say, right before the draft. And one of the things I said was, Cincinnati might not want to draft Joe Burrow. And not because he's not talented and not because he's not, isn't going to be their quarterback for the next 5 or 10 years. It was because they have so many other holes, especially on that offensive line. Like, I felt bad for him because you knew he was going to come in and start. And that's a tough situation to be in, as a rookie quarterback coming in. But he's looked good. He's looked tough. He's been able to kind of scramble away from most of those hits. But he does get hit a lot. So I like Joe Burrow. Consistent, I'd say matchup dependent more than consistent. All right, so to our sleeper. What a disappointment Juju Smith-Schuster has been all season in Pittsburgh. I thought getting Ben Roethlisberger back, Juju was going to be, back to being Juju, and he hasn't looked great. However, Chase Claypool looked phenomenal last week, and Deontay Johnson kind of weeks before that. And I think Juju, you're starting to hear rumblings, right, from Juju saying, hey, I need to get the ball more. And he does. And so I think if they can kind of bait the defense, and I think they're playing Cleveland this week, they can bait the defense into focusing some of their attention on Claypool and Johnson and James Conner out of the backfield. And because Juju is he's kind of the squeaky wheel, I guess, look for Ben to kind of force the issue a little bit with him this week. So for a sleeper, if you need a wide receiver, a flex play, if you got Juju, especially if you drafted him a little earlier than what he's delivering, I think he's a good play this week. So back to our questions. Upside for Hayden Hurst. I don't like the Atlanta, other than Calvin Ridley. I'm not a big fan of the Atlanta offense this year. Todd Gurley had a nice game last week. I think it's going to be dependent on what they do, right? It's kind of similar to Houston. When they fired Bill O'Brien, you're kind of like, well, let's see kind of what the new, how much do they change? How much of the playbook do they change or expand? What do they try to do differently that they weren't doing before? So I would say short term, no. There's not much upside for Hayden Hurst. If they go to a more kind of short pass, tight end type of style, then yeah, sure, he's but you're gonna have to wait and see, because I still think Julio's gonna need to get the ball, right? Calvin Ridley's gonna need to get the ball. Todd Gurley, I like Brian Hill as well, out of the backfield as well for Atlanta. So I don't think short term he's dependent. We'll have to see kind of what the Atlanta offense looks like kind of in the next week or two. If you have him and you have some depth at tight end, like if you have 2 tight ends, I guess, yeah, hang on to him if you have the spot on your bench, but I wouldn't be I wouldn't be surprised if if you dropped Hayden Hurst because you have another tight end, that he'd still be there in a couple of weeks. So I personally wouldn't be clinging on to him too tough. Which actually brings us to our tight ends. So 2 starters this week that I'm super high on. I traded for this one early on, probably gave up too much for him, not going to lie. But TJ Hawkinson against the Jags is going to have a nice week this week for your tight end. Mike Gesicki, who was disappointing early, had a good week last week. I think he's another start against the Jets. So Hawkinson and Gesicki are, if you're looking for some tight ends that are definite starts, it's those 2 guys. And then on the sits, Austin Hooper against Pittsburgh, not a good play this week. Now this one, I actually went back and forth on this one, but I think, and I thought it was last week against Miami where San Francisco was going to get right, and so now I've moved that forward, and I'm like, okay, no, this is the week against a division team in the Rams where San Francisco gets right, and because of that, I'm sitting Tyler Higbee. I hope I'm right on that one. Take that one with some caution, but I think Tyler Higbee's a sit. And then my sleeper, I'm going to take my personal feelings for Trey Burton out of the equation here, because I don't think he lived up to his expectations in Chicago. But having gone to the Colts, he outsnapped both Alex Collie and Jack Doyle. I'm drawing a blank on Jack Doyle's name. And Jack Doyle, and he was actually the number 1 in terms of snaps and plays for the Colts. So look for Trey Burton kind of as a nice under the radar sleeper pick against Cincinnati this week. If you need it, if you're streaming tight ends. Hey Yusuf, how you doing? So to the waiver wire. So we're going to go through, and let me know what you think. If there's any other ones that you're like, should I start sit? Send them in the chat. I'm seeing some stuff coming through, but most of it's kind of in here already. So if you have any other ones, just let me know. So we're going to go to the waiver wire. So obviously, if you need a streamer, if you lost Dak, if you need, or if you stream quarterbacks, Andy Dalton, as I mentioned, is someone you should probably pick up. If he's still available, right, because he obviously coming off a big game. Justin Herbert for the Chargers, he's one that I think you should pick up. He's going to, again, matchup dependent, but I think they're just going to throw the ball a lot. And as long as Keenan Allen's healthy and Mike Williams, you're going to have, and when I think they're going to get Austin Eckler back, look for Justin Herbert to be strong, a strong fantasy QB moving forward. And this one, so I kind of put 2 names here because I put Ryan Fitzpatrick as a start. And I told you I was worried about him because this is one of those games where, you thought he'd do horrible against San Francisco and he was incredible. And now you think, oh, he's just going to be amazing against the Jets. And, that's when he lets you down. So I had Fitzpatrick as one, but I'm going to throw in a double because I think Kirk Cousins is now starting to come around. And look for Kirk Cousins. Again, matchup dependent, but look for the Minnesota offense to get going a little bit. Depending on how long Cook is out, but I think they're in such a good position, which brings me to the next kind of list of running backs for waiver wire. With Madison in the backfield, not that you want anything bad to happen to Dalvin Cook, but what a good insurance policy to have in Alexander Madison. It's fantastic. So if you're looking for a running back, if he's not already off the board, if he's still available on waivers, put him in. I think it's tonight now because of the Tuesday night game. In most leagues, look up for Alexander Madison. I told you this one a couple of weeks ago, but Justin Jackson is another one. I know that everyone was talking a lot about Joshua Kelly, but Justin Jackson's the one that actually got the most snaps. I had him on my team. I made a mistake and left him on the bench. Still won, so I'm not too angry. But Justin Jackson's one. If he's available, you should look at picking him up. And obviously, by now, you've all seen the news about the DUI from Melvin Gordon in Denver. So if he's available, Philip Lindsay. So some people obviously drafted Philip Lindsay. In a couple of my leagues, he's kind of been sitting on benches, and people are like having these aha moments, like I'm glad I hung on to him. But he is still available in over 50% of leagues. So take a look and see if he's available. Maybe someone dropped him because they had to pick up somebody else or whatever because of injuries. So take a look for Philip Lindsay if you need a running back. To the wide receivers. So we always talk about when someone comes off a really big game to be careful because everyone's going to be going after them. And was it a fluke? Was it a one-time thing? And that's where Chase Claypool falls in, right? Rookie out of BC, all the talent in the world, had a phenomenal game. Everyone's going to be going after him. He's probably going to be most people's number one, unless Madison's available, their number one waiver wire pick. He's going to be good, but just don't expect this kind of wide receiver one status out of him. It's not going to happen, right? Like I said, Juju's going to want his. Deontay Johnson's going to want his. There's too many players that are going to want to get in on the action there that I don't think he's going to be a week in, week out start. However, again, matchup dependent. He especially and he is touchdown dependent. I think Chase Claypool's still a good pickup. Just set your bar, set your expectations kind of where they are. Hey, Greg, how you doing? Mike Williams, obviously, depending on Keenan Allen's injury. But Mike Williams, when healthy, is a good deep threat. Like I said, Justin Herbert's going to be throwing the ball deep. So another good pickup if you're in need of some wide receiver help. And the last one, again, I'm high on the Kansas City Chiefs offense. Why wouldn't I be? They're going to score a lot of points. Don't look at that last week's game kind of as an indication. I think that was a blip in the radar. I think you're going to see more scoring from them. And depending on how severe the Sammy Watkins injury is, but looks like he will miss some time, Mecole Hardman's a nice pickup, at least for a couple of weeks. To our tight ends, actually, no, we'll take a break there for a second, and we'll go to another question here. T. Higgins or Brian Ayuk? Okay. I'm really high on T. Higgins, and I kind of told you about how I feel about Joe Burrow. So I'm going T. Higgins, like no question, right off the bat, just because I think he's in a better situation because, one, San Francisco looks out of sorts. Jimmy Garoppolo looks like he's still injured. I know he tried to come back in and play last week, and then he ended up getting benched. Debo Samuel is back. George Kittle is back. There's not enough, I think, to go around to have him kind of as a week in, week out starter. Whereas I think T. Higgins is really that, although I think Tyler Boyd's still wide receiver one, he's kind of 1A, call him wide receiver 2 in Cincinnati. Again, teams that are going to be losing, they're going to throw the ball a lot. So he's going to get a lot of opportunities. So I definitely like T. Higgins over Brian Ayuk. To my tight ends on the waiver wire, I already told you Trey Burton as a sleeper. He's also available in a ton of leagues. So Trey Burton of the Colts, that's one that I would pick up for sure. Eric Ebron, be careful. Again, matchup dependent. Ben kind of wavers with his tight ends. Like 1 week, tight end, huge game, and then he doesn't look to them again for 3 weeks. But I still think Eric Ebron is a good enough talent, and he's kind of worked his way back into that Pittsburgh offense. I think maybe, new system, new quarterback, kind of everything kind of worked against him to begin the season, right? The offseason was there. There's no preseason games. But I think you're going to see him. He's in on the majority of the snaps. So I think Eric Ebron is one that you should look at if you need a tight end on your waiver wire. And the last one is, again, dependent on injury. So Fales in Houston had to leave with a concussion last week. If he's out, look for Jordan Akins as a nice pick as a filler in there. Unless you have one of the top tier, Travis Kelce's, etc., George Kittle's of the world, and you need a tight end, or if you're streaming tight ends, look for Jordan Akins. Again, matchup dependent. So last question. Oh no, we got two. Oh yeah, last question. So after the last question, actually, we're going to do, unless some more come in through the chat, we're going to take a look at the top 5 scorers from week 5 and kind of give you is it kind of, I think I wrote when I posted this was like myth or legend. So these guys, had a great week 5. Is it something that's going to be consistent that you can rely on? Or is it just kind of this 1 week blip? So we're going to get to that after this last question, which is, Do I trade Mike Davis before week 7? If you can, yeah. However, right, like with all, like I love the trade questions because if you're in any of my leagues, like I try to make about 50 trades a day. I'm just, I think I like the trading better than I do the fantasy football. If you can make a trade for Mike Davis and someone will take him and you can get something of value back, yeah, 100%. Look for someone, obviously, if whoever has Christian McCaffrey, if you haven't already, right, after his first big week, that should have been the team that you were targeting, right? Look for someone you like on that team or, 2 players you like on that team and see if you can make a trade for Mike Davis because whoever had Christian McCaffrey obviously took him probably number 1 overall in your draft. And now he needs an RB1, and Mike Davis is a great filler because when Christian McCaffrey is out, Mike Davis, hasn't missed a beat. He's looked great. But Christian McCaffrey is coming back in week 7, or at least is expected to come back in week 7. So you're going to want to make a move for somebody else, obviously, because, not that his value is going to drop drastically when Christian McCaffrey comes back. He'll still have, I think, opportunities, but obviously nowhere near what he's getting now. So yes, if you can trade Mike Davis, move on from him as quickly as you can. All right, so we're just going to go through the top 5 at quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. And it will vary a little bit from standard league and PPR, so I'll give you kind of both. When we started QB, the top scored QB last week, even though they lost, was Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, he's a set it and forget it. Every week he's playing, you start Patrick Mahomes. That's pretty easy. Ryan Tannehill was the number 2 quarterback last week, and that's a surprise because, let's be honest, I thought they overpaid Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. I thought that they were going to be a more run-heavy team with Derrick Henry, but they're slinging the ball. He's throwing the ball a lot. So I think he's matchup dependent. But yeah, I think he can kind of probably be your quarterback for at least for a few weeks this season. Fitzpatrick, I think we talked enough about him. Be careful with him because he's almost anti-matchup dependent. It's those games where you think he's going to do horrible that he does well, and vice versa. So I wouldn't put too much stock into him being a top 5 QB for the rest of the season. Justin Herbert, I think he's top 15. I don't think he's top 5. And then Kyler Murray. I'm glad that Kyler Murray had a good week. I thought he'd have a better season. Forget fantasy for a minute. As you know, I picked, if you've been listening to the Sports Fluent podcast every week, I thought the Cardinals were going to do better this year. And I know that it's early and maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but I still think you're going to see better things from Kyler Murray. So yeah, I think he's definitely legit this year. To our running backs, so we talked about him already quite a bit. Mike Davis was the number 1 scoring running back in PPR leagues. Obviously, because of that, Carolina offense is still using the running backs as receivers quite a bit. So yeah, he's good until week 7, and then you're going to see a drop off. And unless McCaffrey gets hurt again or they limit his snaps, you need to move on from Mike Davis here in a couple of weeks. The next one, I'll admit when I was wrong. Todd Gurley is the number 2 quarterback, number 2 running back, last week. And what I tell you, I don't think he's going to have a good year. I think he's going to do just enough to drive you crazy. He's going to have a game like he did last week where he puts up some big fantasy points, and then he's going to disappear again. So I wouldn't put my stock into Todd Gurley. So I'll pause for a question here on the chat. Rolling with Fitzpatrick or Minshew? Ouch. Lost Dak, rolling with Fitzmagic or Minshew. If I had to pick one of those two, I'm going Fitzpatrick. But again, I've said it 4 or 5 times already today. He's very much kind of matchup dependent, but I'm scared of Fitzpatrick. I am. But I like what he has in Williams, and I'm going to draw a blank on the other wide receiver, on Devontae Parker, right? Like, I like his weapons. I like Gesicki as a tight end. So I think he has enough weapons that, he's not going to do what Dak did for you. But Yeah, I like Fitzpatrick. I'm not a big Minshew fan. I don't think he's going to get it done week in, week out. So yeah, if it's my money, Fitzpatrick. So back to where were we? Todd Gurley, number 2. Number 3 was Miles Sanders. Philadelphia, someone's got to do something in Philly. But I RB2 at best. Ezekiel Elliott was number 4. Obviously, Ezekiel Elliott's going to listen. If the Cowboys are going to be successful and take the NFC East, which I think they have a chance to, although preseason I picked Philadelphia. Dallas, obviously, right? No one's, we might get a winner in the NFC East that's 500, if not worse, unless something changes, the next 2/3 of the season. So look for Ezekiel Elliott, though, to get the ball a lot. So if you have Ezekiel Elliott, if someone's crazy enough to trade you Ezekiel Elliott, do that. And then the number 5 in PPR was Josh Jacobs. Huge fan of Josh Jacobs. Another guy that actually, those are my running backs, Ezekiel Elliott and Josh Jacobs. So I'm hoping they have a great season too. In a standard league, the top 5 actually changes a little bit. It's still kind of the same 5 guys, just a different order. So Zeke moves from 4 to 1. Sanders was number 2, then Gurley, then Davis, and then Jacobs. So same kind of 5 guys, which is rare, which kind of just shows you their versatility. But other than Sanders, right, and Gurley, those are the 2 that got to be careful with week to week. And like I said, Mike Davis, you probably want to move on from him by week 7 or week 8. I wouldn't drop. Don't get me wrong. Don't drop him. But if you can trade him right now, he's one of those sell high guys that you should take. To wide receivers, we talked about him. Chase Claypool was your number 1 PPR and standard league scorer. He had a huge game, bunch of touchdowns. Don't look for that to continue. He's going to probably frustrate you because he's going to have a game or 2 more like this. But he's going to drop, he's going to drop a 3 on you this week, and you're going to be, pounding your head against the wall. So be careful of him. Then number 2 was Mike Williams in PPR, Fulham in standard. Again, we talked about those guys. I think while Keelan Allen will probably get the majority of targets, Mike Williams will probably be the bigger threat guy. So he's a good flex play, and be careful of Fulham this week, as I mentioned, against Baltimore. Then you had Cooks, who was 3rd in PPR and standard league, which I'm not high on that Houston offense. I don't think Cooks is going to be reliable for the rest of the season moving forward. And then number 4 was DK Metcalf, who's just going to be a stud the rest of the season. If you're able to pick up Metcalf in your draft, good for you. Hang on to him. And then Thielen was for standard leagues. And then Travis Fulham and Williams 5th, PPR and standard leagues. So those are your starts, sits, and sleepers, your waivers, your top plays of last week, and your questions. We'll leave the chat open for a couple more minutes if you have any more questions to roll in. If not, don't forget to, if you're not already following us on Instagram, but also on Twitter at sports_fluent. Check us out every week, 9:30 for Sports Fluent Fantasy Live. And if you have any questions or comments, you can always email me directly at anthonyk@sportsfluent.com or check out the website, sportsfluent.com.